Perfect.
Hope everyone took their speed test. Or project.
That's right. Okay, so, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Governance Task Force on Broadband. This is our August meeting. I know we haven't spoken to each other about in a month and a half, so hoping everybody's had a great summer and hopefully had a chance to take some time off and enjoy some of the beautiful weather. I mean, right now, this is just about as good as it gets right now, so I'm pretty excited about that. So let's see. We have a good agenda today. We'll start out as we have it on the screen with just kind of a roll call, which I'll ask Diane here to do in a second. Approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Then from that, we have folks from the Minnesota Department of Education to come in and give us an overview of the CARES Act and the funding that's available for distance learning. I think that will be a very engaging session and something we can take a lot of and something we can start to think through as far as, when we talk about the needs for broadband and why the investments is required in our state. This is going to be one of the major drivers, I think, and that's going to be exciting. We'll have time for a quick break. We'll see how sort of the agenda goes. It's scheduled for a 5-minute break, but we can make it 10 minutes if we have some time. And then from that, we'll essentially turn the rest of the time to the updates from the subgroups, and we'll go through each one of those. Just a quick report out, some of the discussions that have happened. And then the very last portion of the meeting, I'd like to dedicate it to start to think about the report writing, right? So we have a report that's going to be due towards the latter part of the year. Again, we don't have to do anything specific at this moment, but starting to think about the skeleton of it a little bit, and also the who's going to do what portion of it, and all those kind of things. So I have some ideas around that, but love to get the input and the feedback from others and from others that have done this before, or even some new ideas of how we want to make a report out of the things we've been listening to and working on. And then, as usual, we'll end the meeting with any other business and any comments that are available from others that may also not be on the task force. And that will be the wrap-up for today. So with that, maybe Diane, I'll turn it over to you to do a roll call for the task force.
Sure. Teddy, you're here.
Here.
Nolan Calvin. I haven't seen him. I'll come back. Dale Cook. Steve Fensky.
Morning, everybody.
Steve Georgie.
I'm here.
And then we had a new task force member appointed since our last meeting, Jason Hollanday.
Good morning. Morning, Jason.
Hello. Mark Johnson. Mark is not here today. Bernadine Jocelyn. Brian Candier. Yeah, I've seen her too.
Brian's here, Diane.
Micah Myers. I'll come back to the ones that are maybe trying to find their unmute button. Teresa Sunday.
I'm here.
Jim Wycombe.
Good morning.
Paul Wirt. Dave Wolf.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Dave. Okay, Nolan Calvin. Dale Cook. Steve Fensky.
Morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Did I miss you the first time? I might have not checked you.
No,
Steve
you got me
Georgie?
the first time, unless, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Bernadine? Micah?
Here.
Okay, Micah. Paul Wirt? All right, I saw Paul, so I'm seeing people that I'm not hearing.
Yeah, and I think I saw Bernadine speaking too, but we can't hear her.
Okay. Oh yeah, I see Bernadine now, but your lips are moving and nothing's coming out. Yeah. Okay.
I think you have to go up to participant on the top bar and then click unmute, because they might have all muted at the beginning.
And Diane, there's also no Dale Cook is also on the call.
Yep, I saw him and I saw Paul. So okay.
All right, and then are there others that are not on the task force that are in the meeting? You don't have to, but you can make yourself known at this moment if you want to. You can go through.
This is Brent Christensen with the Minnesota Telecom Alliance.
Brent.
This is Dana Bailey with CenturyLink.
Morning, Dana.
This is Pam Lehman with Lehman Business Services.
Morning, Pam.
This is Daniel Leith with the League of Minnesota Cities.
Morning, Daniel. All right. Okay. So one task item, Jason Hollanday is on the call with us. I know we had a vacant seat as Shannon Heim left and took a new position in a different state. So Jason, we want to welcome you to the task force. Glad to have you on board and looking forward to all the input you'll bring to us and the discussions we'll have. We'll also at some point need to assign you to a work group or a subgroup, so I'll work on doing that. But perhaps before we get deeper into it, maybe you just want to give us a quick introduction of yourself and why you had an interest in joining this task force. That'd be phenomenal.
Okay, morning everybody. My name is Jason Hollanday. I'm the planning director for the Fond du Lac Reservation in northern Minnesota. I worked for the reservation for 25 years now in the planning division. I've been the planning director since 2006. Just have a general interest with this. I worked with Fred Underwood, who was on this group at some point in time in the past. We worked on a number of projects at Fond du Lac, one of them being our broadband project, our fiber to the home project for the reservation itself. So kind of an interest in this. Our tribal council is interested in this group, and they thought I'd be a good person for it because I helped set up our network at Fond du Lac.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. We really appreciate you being on the task force. That's very exciting. Had we not have the pandemic, actually one of the things we had discussed in the past for our meeting was to have that on a tribal land or lease maker visit. So I don't know if we'll be able to get that done this year, but if not this year, for sure next year, it's something that we want to put on our agenda. So exciting to have you on board and get your input and your insights.
Thank you.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. With that, Diane also in the meeting invitation sent out a copy of the minutes from our last meeting. Were there any questions, comments about the minutes from the meeting on June 24th? Okay, hearing no comments or questions, we'll unanimously approve those meetings and move on to our next session. So the next piece is really to focus on, again, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit overview of the CARES Act and some of the funding that's been designated for distance learning. So we're privileged to have the Minnesota Department of Education here to present that to us. So I believe we have Alicia, Michael, and Sarah. Are they on the call right now?
I see Michael.
There. Looks like Sarah's on as well. Michael or Sarah, are you able to hear us? And yet. How about now? Oh, we can hear you now. Michael, thanks for being on with us. Will you be the one doing the presentation, or do we need to figure out how to get Sarah connected as well?
Sarah should be joining us right about now, and she'll be the one kind of driving.
Good.
I'm sure somebody's already commented on this, but I'm worried about the gravity where Jason is. It's here is horizontal.
Sarah, are you on with us? Also just getting from Paul Ward saying he's dialed in, but you can't hear him. Yep. I think we've lost Sarah now.
Michael, this is Diane. Do you or Sarah have the presentation? You could send it to Eric Leitner at Deed, and he could put it up.
We'll see what we can do.
Hi, this is Paul. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, Paul,
Yes,
we can hear you now.
Great. Yeah, I had to download that app, which is kind of interesting. We don't have to do that with our corporate WebEx, but it's a new one on me.
I think I don't know why this time it's more challenging. I had the same issue where it took me a couple of minutes to get connected. Somebody join. Okay, well, while we're waiting on this one, is there any other business that we should be discussing while we wait for the presenters to get ready? It's a good time to get any comments in, or I don't know if at the next meeting we'll be able to be face to face. I'm hoping maybe with some of the social distancing measures and some of the work that's going on. I know for our organization, we're starting to think about being able to do some meetings together. So hopefully for the September meeting, we may try to get together if that's possible. But again, it's going to be a day-to-day thing to see how we progress.
Teddy,
I also see that Alicia.
Teddy, this is Dave
Go ahead.
Wolf. I throw one thing out there.
Sure.
Now, the CBRS auction is taking place right now, which is auction 105. It's 3.5 gigahertz band. And they're at round 19 right now. And the FCC has raised $1.3 billion so far for about 70 megahertz in rural spectrum. That is capable of hosting speeds up to 2 gigabits if there was just one user on it. Just food for thought.
Interesting.
This is Teresa. We're participating in that auction. I know we won one in Lake County, California, because nobody else was bidding out there. We have several areas in southern Minnesota near the Wisconsin border and also in northern Minnesota. So it's just a slow process, I guess, with this auction. I don't know how long it's going to go on.
Yeah, they're talking 3 more rounds. Yeah, scheduled.
Yeah, it's pretty slow, but it's important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Why is it so slow? Do we know?
They have a little bit different process for this auction, and it actually confused a number of people that missed some entry fees. I think there's only 200 to 300 bidders, unfortunately, and it's just a different way of doing it from what the FCC normally does, from what we've gathered.
I've got the presentation pulled up on my computer. I won't go there.
Okay. Hey, Michael. Thank you. I also saw that Alicia has joined now, too.
Yes, and I'm on too now. had problems getting in. This is Sarah.
Morning, Sarah. How are you today?
Doing well, thanks.
Well, glad all the technical difficulties are past us. Maybe I shouldn't speak too soon. All right, Michael, I think you are free to share now. Oh, see something coming up. Awesome. Can see it. Perfect. We can see it. So, Alicia, Sarah, and Michael, feel free to take it. Oh, it went away. Okay. Yep. We can see it again now. So, I'll let you guys take it away.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having us today. I'm Sarah George. I am the Title I Program Specialist, and I'm joined today by Michael Dietrich, who is our ESEA Policy Specialist, and also by Alicia Wackler, who is our supervisor in our Equity and Opportunity Division, which manages all of the federal title grants. So today we wanted to share with your team a little bit of an overview on the Elementary and Secondary Education Act grants, which are one of the packages of formula grants that are distributed by the U.S. Department of Education through state education agencies, of which the Minnesota Department of Education is one. So these are federal monies that come to us at the state, and then the state distributes those monies to districts. So we wanted to talk about how those work. And then we wanted to talk about the new set of formula grant funding from the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, which had 3 grants embedded that come to K through 12 education and are also being distributed through Minnesota Department of Education and also through our Division of Equity and Opportunity. And then finally, we wanted to talk about what kinds of technology infrastructure considerations there might be access to, especially in this time of hybrid and digital learning, so that we can share with your team what you're able to do with those grants and what districts could partner with and how they could blend and grade those grant funds and what they are not able to do. So that you've got a sense of both the capabilities and limitations of those grants. So we start all of our work at the Minnesota Department of Education by looking at our 10 commitments to equity. And we're really thinking, especially in our division, which is the Division of Equity and Opportunity, around how we can leverage those federal formula grants through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to help our learners. And so today we're focusing on how our work helps empower more students by following the money and also by improving conditions for learning. So the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is not new. It was authorized for the first time in 1965 during the Lyndon Johnson administration, and it has been reauthorized several times since. Probably the most famous reauthorization happened in 2002 with the No Child Left Behind Act, which was the first time that they really put in a lot of accountability provisions into this act. But it's been reauthorized since then. So the current authorization of that law is called the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, and that's its reauthorized form in 2015. And there are actually some fairly substantial changes to the way that those grant programs work that we've seen now in the past 5 years since ESSA was passed. We are not today talking about some other federal formula grants. There are federal formula grants that come to the schools in the form of money that is restricted categorically for the needs of special education, or IDEA grants. touching on the biggest grants that come from ESSA or ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So specifically at our division at MDE, we are responsible for these programs. Title I Part A, which is about improving basic programs and services for learners who have not yet met academic standards. Title I Part C, which is for migrant education. Title I D, which is for learners who have been neglected or are incarcerated or going through some rehabilitation. Title I Part 2, or Title II Part A rather, which is about supporting effective instruction. Title III goes to English language acquisition and English learners enhancement of language development. Title IV Part A, which is about student support and academic enrichment, also called well-rounded learning. Title V, which is the Rural Education Achievement Program, and then you also see Title IX Part A, which is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Program. There are some other titles that are distributed, but those are not through our division. So notably Title VI, which is American Indian Education. Those grants don't come directly through MDE, but we do collaborate with the Office of American Indian Education at the state on discussing the use of those grants. But these are the grant programs administered by our division. As you can imagine, this has been a busy year because in addition to all of those grants, we also now are taking care of 3 new grants under the CARES Act. So we have been very busy lately. These federal formula grants have a specific process that we go through. The first, the U.S. Department of Education allocates the funding, and then it goes to MDE. We at the Department of Ed then use the formula to figure out how much goes to each district. Then districts know how much they're getting, but they still need to apply. So the districts apply and tell us how they plan to use their money. Then MDE approves their budget, and then they spend the money and are then reimbursed. So they have to tell us how they plan to use the money before they are able to spend it, and then it's a reimbursement style of funding. To get a sense for the size of these awards, in Minnesota, we have about just over 500 districts that receive Title I Part A funding. And districts in Minnesota are included in that are our traditional geographic school districts. So St. Paul Public Schools is a traditional geographic school district. Anoka Hennepin is a traditional geographic school district. But in addition to traditional geographic school districts, each charter school or charter school network in Minnesota is also considered to be its own district. And so we have some districts that have 40,000 students, and we have some districts with 40 students. And so that's why you get a very big span in the size of these grant awards. So what you see here is the general, to give you a general sense for what the awards look like, the Title I Part A awards look like across Minnesota. There are only 2 recipients that get between $0 and $499. And instead, we see that most school districts in Minnesota receive between $550,000, between $50,000 and $150,000. And so that's 36% of the district. And those really large sums of money that come in for Title I, there are actually only 21 districts that get over $1 million in their Title I Part A award. And so you see everything in between an award that is under $500 and awards that are over $1 million. But for most school districts, you see the gray column there and the yellow column. Most of our school districts are somewhere between $50,000 and $300,000 in their Title I award. And that's important for you to know because the CARES Act funding is also based upon the size of their Title I award. Title I is calculated technology infrastructure. We can use those ESEA funds to support teaching and learning with technology through professional development. Professional development is an allowable use of the funds under Title I, II, III, and IV. We can also support the development and acquisition of some digital materials and resources, and that depends on the use of those. They're restricted differently in different funding streams. We can provide devices for educators and students to access digital learning resources depending upon what their use is, and that is different depending on sizes of schools, the program models that they're using, and how they plan to use those devices. So we do get into the weeds a little bit in grants management when we start to talk about digital devices and software, but it is permissible with some of the funding streams. And then some of the programs can be used, though, to support digital devices like tablets, hotspots, and data plans. Our most flexible funding stream tends to be the funding streams for homeless learners, which is the Title I Part A McKinney-Vento set aside for learners who are experiencing homelessness, and also the McKinney-Vento sub-grant, where we can provide more of that hardware for students if the student is experiencing housing insecurity. But like we said, there are parameters on a lot of allowable use. So there's a lot of coordination that occurs, and there's also a sense that we need to be able to, as the Department of Education, understand what the intended outcomes are for each stream of grant money, so that we can ensure that it is being used correctly. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague, Michael Dietrich, who will talk specifically about these new CARES Act funds.
Thank you, Sarah. So the CARES Act itself was split up into many different funding streams doing lots of different things, from the direct payments to households, to small business loans, to a range of different funds aimed at helping state and local governments. For us at MDE, the most relevant has been the Education Stabilization Fund, and in particular within it, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or GEAR, and the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. There's also a Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, but unsurprisingly running through the Office of Higher Education. There are other funding streams in the CARES Act that can also end up being coordinated with this. There's a Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF, that is out there that is also a source of funds. There are quite a few things that are out there running through different strands of work and support. But within education, these are the ones that our division is administering, and then we are going to be picking up some of the CRF funds as well. Not through our division, but through our agency. So, GEAR is all told for Minnesota about $43.4 million. ESSER is a bit bigger at $140.1 million. The way GEAR is set up in the law, we're going with priorities set by the governor's office. So each governor gets to set their priorities for how they want GEAR funds to be used. For ESSER, that one's a little bit more set in terms by the feds. Most of that money, 90% of it, goes out in a formula to districts and charter schools based on their Title I Part A allocation. So, exactly those funds that Sarah was just talking about with that chart showing the distribution. We are awarding most of the ESSER funds based on how much money districts are getting from that same distribution. Another 9.5% of ESSER we get to distribute at our discretion through state-directed grants that we're doing in consultation with the governor's office to make sure that they're interacting well with the GEAR priorities. And 0.5% gets held back for state administration, so getting the IT pieces up and working, covering the time for grant reviewers, specialists, and so on. Here in Minnesota, the governor's office and leadership at MDE, after talking with people from around the state, arrived at a few key priorities for GEAR, looking at technology access being one of the big ones, here including broadband, as well as hotspots and devices for students, knowing that each community is facing a slightly different balance of needs in these areas. So recognize that in some places, adding more mobile hotspots is a useful way to help. In other places, it doesn't do much good if the cell service isn't great. Summer learning is another priority for the year funds, and in particular trying to get an in-person student-to-teacher ratio down from its current average of 12 to 1 down to 9 to 1, or if possible 6 to 1. And then a $5 million out of that 43.4 has been set aside for a separate competitive grant program for early learning that we won't be talking about too much here today. But most of the year money is going to technology and summer learning, and on technology very much on the hardware and connectivity side. For ESSER, that 90% formula is very, very broad in the law. We're encouraging districts to focus on keeping students healthy and connected to learning, looking at lots of different dimensions of that, including digitally connected, and then meeting other local needs that they may have. For the state-directed grants, there we're trying to, in part, supplement the tech and summer learning pieces from here, as well as providing mental health support, and making sure that there is particular attention to our historically underserved population. So, for year, we've been pretty straightforward with districts that the allocations can be used for broadband, hotspots, and devices within the technology space. Within the summer learning space, it's about staffing and transportation. For the formula grants, again, that works out to about 80% the size of the existing Title I Part A allocation. So imagine those bands on that chart that Sarah showed, and up and down to 80%. That's what people are getting out of the ESSER formula funds, but they are additional funds. They're not replacing the Title I Part A funds, they're not replacing any other funds. They are additional funds to be used now in response to COVID-19. So, as I mentioned, these are incredibly broad. So they can be used for anything from the ESEA, any expenses allowable under the ESEA, any of those programs that Sarah listed. Anything from those is allowable for these funds. Anything from the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, which focuses on students with receiving special education services. Anything from the McKinney-Bento homelessness program. Anything from the Carl Perkins Current Technical Education law. Anything. There's a family adult education statute, federal statute as well. That's part of that. That is one of 12 allowable uses of anything that those things will allow, as well as anything else that is specifically supporting students affected by the coronavirus, or public health response, anything that helps coordinate the response to the coronavirus, anything that helps maintain continuity of operations and services. So I want to note here that these funds, as well as YEAR and the other ESSER funds, have a pretty long timeline. They can be used for anything coronavirus related from March 13th of 2020. They can be used, they can be backdated for expenses back to March 13th of this year. And they can be obligated all the way through September 30th of 2022. That's again for YEAR and both ESSER programs. They've got that long a timeline. As we're thinking about that long a timeline and the amount of flexibility involved with ESSER, we've been messaging to districts the importance of meeting students' foundational needs first and then building up from there, especially because many of the other programs we have tend to be more focused directly on the academic classroom experience. So we've been heavily encouraging folks to think about using these ESSER formula funds to think about meeting health needs, physical, mental, social, and emotional, because we know that all of those dimensions of health have taken a hit, and if students aren't healthy, it doesn't matter if we've got connection mechanisms in place for them. If they're not healthy, they're not able to engage with the learning. Similarly, if our staff aren't healthy, they aren't able to engage and expect to provide that learning. The next kind of tier of needs is that connection piece. So that's physical in terms of safely getting students to and from school in places that do that as they're able to. It also very much is about the digital connection in terms of both devices and connectivity. as well as the social and emotional connections, because if a student has a device and has broadband, but feels alienated by the experience at school, they're not going to use those to their own benefit. So thinking about all those dimensions, and then from there we can get into the effectiveness of learning opportunities, as well as our other local needs. I do want to note here, as we're thinking about these, there are several parts in the law and in our guidance to districts where we are calling out a particular working to meet the needs of historically underserved populations, thinking about income, race and ethnicity, disability status, language, homelessness, and a range of other characteristics. Knowing that in general, a lot of our historically underserved populations are also the ones who are most disproportionately feeling the impact of both COVID-19 itself and the disruptions caused by the necessary public health response. So the third funding stream is that 9.5% state-directed grant. There, we're doing three different things in terms of allocating the funds. First, we're making sure that anybody that didn't get part of that formula fund, that 90% formula, is getting a grant out of the state-directed grant. So that includes some of our intermediate districts, some of our cooperatives, some of our newer charter schools that weren't eligible for Title I Part A last school year, either because of the type of district they are, in the case of the intermediates or the co-ops, or because they were too new to have the necessary enrollment numbers in place to be able to be awarded Title I Part A. So that's our first piece. Our second piece is making sure that everybody gets brought up to at least $10,000 in ESSER funds. And then the third piece for the 9.5%, which is most of it, is distributed to those districts and charter schools where their share of total ESSER funds is less than their share of students from historically underserved populations. So making sure that we're doing some additional equalization work there to try to bring folks up to having a share of funds proportional to their share of students from historically underserved populations. That's how the money gets distributed. The use is any summer learning needs or other tech needs. Yep, on the next slide. Yep, any summer learning or tech needs that aren't met with year funds, meeting mental health needs, meeting the specific needs of students from historically underserved populations. Again, noting that like year and like the ESSER formula, these can be used from March 13th of 2020 through September 30th of 2022. So as we think about these in the context of internet access, the year funds, especially on the technology side, and the ESSER 90% formula are the best bets for being used to expand access. Although we may see districts choosing to prioritize other things over those. So that's a place where there is a local decision about how are they balancing their needs. The 9.5% grants are a slightly tougher connection there, but especially if it's in the service of meeting the needs of students from historically underserved populations, there the ESSER 9.5% grants could come into play as well. But the geared technology funds and the ESSER 90% formula funds are the best bets for that work. They can be used to work with internet providers to improve connection speed, subsidize home connections, otherwise increase student access to broadband. If those plus other funds get you to the point where you can do some serious infrastructure improvements, that would be allowable. They can go to community partners that are working on improving connectivity. And we've got a CARES Act funding information page. I'll be dropping the link to that into the chat here momentarily. From there, the first link up in there is the set of allocations. So you can see what each district is getting from each of the funding streams. So if you're doing some mental math in your head, thinking about those that original distribution of Title I Part A grants that Sarah showed, thinking about, okay, if you take that down to 8%, you spread that amount of money over March 13th of 2020 to September 13th of 2022, you take into account the other needs that may end up being prioritized. The education-specific CARES Act funds on their own may not be able to do a ton in terms of direct broadband work, but they can do some, and they can be particularly powerful if they're combined with other sources. So other CARES Act funding sources are coming directly to counties or through other mechanisms to local governments including but not limited to the Coronavirus Relief or CRF grant. A lot of those other funds have a much tighter timeline where they have to be spent by the end of December of this calendar year, whereas GEAR and ESSER have a longer timeline. So if you're able to get the school district in consultation with the county about how we're going to use these balance of funds, you can use the shorter term timeline funds right away and then save some of the GEAR and ESSER funds for that longer term use going forward. So strongly recommend coordination between districts, charter schools, counties, and other CARES Act fund recipients, community organizations, and the like, to coordinate how they're using the full combination of their CARES Act funds to meet the biggest needs in their communities, given how split up and specialized some of these funds become. So that is what we had prepared, and very interested in fielding any questions that you have.
Okay, so we'll open it up to questions from the task force members to Michael, Sarah, and Alicia.
Eddie, I have a question.
Go ahead, Steve.
So is it fair to say that the state or the Department of Ed has determined or decided that the local school districts are going to be responsible for student broadband connections?
In the context of these funding streams are set up primarily to go directly to districts. So all of ESSER is set up with the explicit construct that it will be going directly to districts for their use, and that is the biggest piece. And then, yes, the governor's office, in consultation with the MDE leadership, decided that the GEAR funds would be sent out to individual districts and charter schools rather than coordinated into a particular project. I can't speak to some of the decisions that were made around other CARES Act funds, but that is how the decisions got made for GEAR and ESSER.
So, Michael, following up that question, as far as, you said some of the funding could be used for infrastructure type projects if that's what it calls for. So how does that get coordinated? Again, is that up to the school district, or does it come back to the Office of Broadband? Just want to understand that a little bit better.
I think there are lots of different people who could play that kind of a role in initiating that coordination. That could start with a district, it could start with a county, it could start with a city, it could start with a foundation that is keeping track of this and is working to bring the relevant partners together. But it is going to need to be coordinated at the local level rather than, as far as I'm aware, there is not any effort, at least at MDE. I don't know about other parts of the state government to be initiating that coordination.
Thank you. Other questions for the team here?
This is Diane Wells. I did have a question. Michael, you mentioned the possibilities of districts working with counties. I've heard from a few counties that I know are planning to use their CARES Act funding for broadband. Do you know of any actual partnerships that are happening between districts and counties?
We have not had most of our districts apply yet, so a lot of them are still working out their plans for how they're going to do this. I think we've received a total of maybe 10% of the applications that we'll eventually be getting have come into this point, so most of them are still out there. Most of the ones that we've received have been from pretty small places where their geared funds are $10,000 or less, and they're putting it directly into student devices. Because with that kind of an amount, they're usually very small rural districts or charter schools. Tend to be a lot of what we've seen up to this point come in, so there's still a lot of space out there for planning. We know also that there are many places that are looking to coordinate what they're doing with their CARES Act funds, GEAR and ESSER, with what they're doing with their title funds that Sarah was talking about, because all of those applications tend to come in around the beginning of the school year. We've got some folks that are just now at the point where they are finishing up the coordination piece, so we're expecting to see more coming in there, but there is still definitely time to be initiating those conversations. I'm not aware of anybody that's independently reached out to me to say, hey, we're interested in doing this from the district level to initiate it. But we know that there are several who recognize it as an issue and have raised concern about the issue. So there it's a matter of making sure that they can get connected with their county or their community partners.
Yep. I was going to just say, too, that school districts have been in a really reactive space, as have all governments right now. And so a lot of the access kinds of conversations that went on real initially were about how we could get immediate access. So can we equip buses with hotspots? Can we get hotspots to homeless shelters? Those kinds of really quick, reactive, easier wins were the kinds of things that school districts were talking about right out of the gate. I think, the infrastructure planning around broadband is probably a conversation a lot of school districts would welcome from other community partners and organizations. But it's a switch of the way that everyone has been thinking, because we've been in this space where it's like, oh my goodness, now we're all going to do distance learning or hybrid learning. How do we get that happening? And so people look for the fastest solutions first.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the task force?
Eddie, can you hear me? Hello?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Bernadine, if we can hear you now.
Hey. Yeah, great. Hello, everybody. This isn't directly related to what we heard from Michael and Sarah, but I just wanted to make sure that the members of the task force were aware of kind of an analogous a supporting initiative that has been stood up by the governor's office called the Partnership for Connected MN. It's a new public-private partnership that's being led by the Governor's Children Cabinet in coordination with Best Buy, Blenheim Foundation, Minnesota Business Partnership, Comcast, and the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundations. And just on Friday, the partnership announced a new request for proposal seeking grants from members of the Minnesota Education Technology Network, of which Mark Johnson on our task force as a representative. They aggregate technology support for school districts across the state. Also eligible applicants include tribal governments, our tribal contract schools, there are 4 BIE schools in the state, and then not-for-profit organizations that support students in school learning environments. So we are accepting grant applications for up to $150,000. They're due September 1st to support this nexus of activities that Michael and Sarah have talked about us today: devices, connectivity, and supporting services. So these funds are meant to come alongside and augment the federal and state money that we've heard about from Michael and Sarah. I'm going to, in the chat box now, send a link to the RFP, and then we'll invite anybody on the call or others of their colleagues to reach out to me with any questions about this additional opportunity to support students and their distance learning challenges. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Bernadine. Yep, we see Okay, other questions, comments from the task force on this topic? Okay. Hearing none, well, Sarah, Michael, and Alicia, really want to thank you for your time and making the effort to be here and present this to us. This is actually super informative, and I think we'll also funnel some of the recommendations we might make in the future.
Thank you all very much for inviting us and giving us some space and time.
Great. Awesome.
Thank you. And feel free to reach out to us. We're pretty easy to get a hold of via email, and we're taking all kinds of unique questions about what grants can be used for. because we're trying learning in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. You certainly have a challenge on your hands there, so novel ideas are probably welcome. Okay, so let's do this. Let's take a 15-minute break, well, a 12-minute break. We'll kind of resume back at 11:05, and then go from there, and we'll start up the reports, outs, and discussions from the subgroups. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Thanks.